Let's talk about Architecture of Luxury 2050. Let me start with something very simple. Luxury has never really been what people think it is. It has never been a surface language, not at its core. What we see today is objects, the campaigns, the storytelling, even the experiences. That is only the visible layer, almost like an interface. But the system underneath has always been something else, something much more structured, much more controlled, and much more silent in the way it operates. Because luxury historically was never built as a product system. It was built as a system of distance. And I want you to really sit with that for a moment. Distance is not a marketing idea. It's an architectural principle. Because distance is what produces meaning. It regulates excess. It controls interpretation. It shapes desires without ever directly explaining itself. Now, if we go back even further, before globalization, before digital acceleration, before visibility becomes constant, luxury functioned in a very specific way. It was not scalable, and that is important because scale changes logic. Luxury was designed for hierarchy, not expansion, and hierarchy is not static. Hierarchy is structural control over meaning distribution. So, meaning was never evenly available. It was layered, it was filtered, it was deliberately incomplete. And that incompleteness is what created desire. Let me say that again in a simpler way. People did not desire luxury because they fully understood it. They desired it because they did not. That gap is the system. Now we move into the present. And this is where everything starts to shift. We are now operating in a condition where visibility is infinite. Everything is visible. Everything is documented. Everything is instantly accessible. And at first, that sounds like a progress. But structurally, it changes everything. Because while everything becomes visible, visibility stops being rare. And when visibility stops being rare, it stops creating distinction. So, the system has to reallocate values somewhere else. And this is where the first major shift happens. Value moves from visibility to interpretation. Now, pause here, because this is not a small adjustment. This is a full system reconfiguration. Luxury is no longer defined by what it is seen. It is defined by what it is understood. And more importantly, who is capable of understanding it. Now, let me slow down and make this more concrete. Historically, luxury assumed identity was stable. You had a defined audience, a defined status group, a defined cultural positioning, but today, identity is no longer stable in that way. It is fluid. It shifts across context, across platforms, across moments, because sometimes even within the same day, and I have seen this repeatedly. The same individual engaging with the same brand but expecting different forms of meaning depending on context. Not inconsistency, but contextual identity behavior. And this creates a problem. Because luxury systems were built for fixed identity structure, not dynamic ones. So now we have a mismatch between a fixed system logic and a fluid identity environment. And this is where misalignment begins to appear quietly, without collapse, just gradual loss of resonance. Now, let's go deeper. Luxury used to operate through three core pillars: visibility, narrative, experience. But all three are now structurally saturated. Visibility is infinite, narratives are everywhere, and experiences standardized. And when everything becomes experience, experience stops differentiating anything. So again, the system shifts and we begin to move from experience-based luxury to response-based luxury. Let me explain. Luxury is no longer about what it presents. It is about how it responds to identity, to context, to expectations, and that response becomes the real product. Now, at this point, luxury starts behaving less like communication and more like an interface, a cognitive interface, something that interacts with identity in real time. Now, this is important because once luxury becomes an interface, the evaluation criteria changes completely. The question is no longer, what does this brand say about me? The question becomes, does this system understand me? And if it does not, it is immediately irrelevant. Not rejected, just removed silently. Now, let's talk about branding. Branding was designed for stability, repetition, recognition over time. But branding assumes something that no longer exists. It assumes meaning is slow. Today, meaning is fast, recombined, continuous. So, repetition no longer builds authority in the same way. It builds saturation, and saturation reduces clarity, which reduces trust, which reduces relevance. So, we get a paradox. Highly visible systems losing structural influence, not because they are weak, but because they are overexposed. Now, let's shift into influence. Because influence has changed its role completely. It's no longer just amplification. It has become substitution in some cases. Meaning is no longer just extended through influence. It is replaced by influence. The personality becomes the brand. The brand becomes secondary. And this introduces instability because influence is not owned. It is borrowed. And borrowed systems cannot guarantee coherence over time. So luxury has to recalibrate again from persuasion to alignment. Persuasion pushes meaning outwards. Alignment collaborates meaning inward. And alignment is now the real standard. Now let's move into ownership. Ownership used to define luxury. It creates permanence. It created stability. But ownership assumes stability in the system itself. And we no longer have that. We are in the access-driven environments, context-driven value systems. So, ownership still exists, but it is no longer the primary source of meaning. Relevance is. Moment-based relevance, context-based relevance, identity-based relevance. Now, let's talk about craftsmanship. Because this is where a major misunderstanding exists. Craftsmanship is not disappearing, but it is evolving. It's no longer only about execution quality. It's about alignment intelligence, how precisely something aligns with the identity across context, across time, across perception layer. And this makes craftsmanship a form of intelligence, not just skill. Now, let's zoom out. Because when you put all of this together, something becomes clear. Luxury is moving away from mass communication system and towards precision-based value system. Mass logic is based on averaging, but averaging destroys distinction. You cannot average your way into luxury. So the system shifts again from mass to precision, from visibility to coherence, from communication to calibration. Now, here is the final layer. Luxury is no longer a brand-centric system. It is becoming an individual-centric system. The individual is now the reference point. Everything else adapts around it. which means luxury is no longer something you simply consume. It is something you navigate. And in navigation systems, precision matters more than scale. So the final question becomes very simple. Now, what is visible? Not what is popular, but what is coherent. Because coherence is now the foundation of luxury authority across time, across culture, across interpretation. And when coherence breaks, luxury does not fail loudly. It dissolves quietly. And that is the real architecture of luxury 2050. Not louder, not larger, but structurally precise.